Okay, so on the agenda tonight, I'm gonna first talk through Arizona water law. And then we're gonna talk a little bit about the characteristics of what make up Scottsdale. We're gonna talk about the Salt River Project water. We'll talk about our groundwater. We'll talk about Central Arizona Project. And then what's happening in the news with the Colorado River shortage and what Scottsdale has been doing. So let's just dive right into Arizona water law and how we govern our water resources. All right, Arizona is a really interesting place to be when it comes to water. Now, in the eyes of the law, Arizona has a bifurcated system, which means the surface water rates and groundwater rates are treated completely differently. They're completely separate in the eyes of the law, even if they're necessarily not in the natural world. So Arizona, just like a lot of the Western United States, is governed by what's called the prior appropriate doctrine for surface water. It's basically referred to as first in time, first in right. And this depiction here is that if you got there first, you get a priority right to the water. 100 years ago or so, if you got here in the West and you put a stake in the ground and said, this water is mine, you have that water right from that point forward, and you have more of a senior right than the person that came after you. Here in Arizona, we have something that governs the groundwater in this state. It's called the Groundwater Management Act of 1980. This was a monumentous legislative effort that here in Arizona, as water resource planners, we're really proud of, because it was innovative. It managed our groundwater in a way that a lot of Western states are still catching up on. And it was passed because we had a lot of what's called overdraft issues, which means that the groundwater was being pumped severely, causing things like subsidence, earth fissures. The groundwater levels in the ground were decreasing lower and lower, to the point that the governance structure and the legislatures had basically told Arizona, we have to do something. So the 1980 Groundwater Management Act regulates the groundwater in the most populated areas of the state. It is the permitting authority, and it governs the areas called active management areas. So what is an active management area? There are 5 in the state, and we sit in the Phoenix active management area. Basically means that it governs the groundwater within that area in very specific ways. The Phoenix groundwater, the active management area, has a specific goal to meet safe yield by 2025. This is a goal as in the statute, and it basically means that the groundwater needs to come to a nice balance, that not more is taken out than is naturally put in. However, we in the Phoenix area are not anywhere close to actually getting to safe yield by 2025. This chart here kind of shows how it ebbs and flows over since 1985. The red areas are in places, are those years where we didn't have as much replenishment in comparison to the groundwater that we took out, and those areas of blue, it's the exact opposite. We took out less than was replenished naturally. So the Phoenix AMA has been in overdraft since 2010. The state is working to mitigate this, but there's some issues in the way to figure out exactly how to get to that point. You should know that the city of Scottsdale back in 2006, because this is an active management goal, and not necessarily something that each one of us necessarily has to get to by 2025. However, the city of Scottsdale made it a goal of theirs in 2006 to do so. So we don't take out any groundwater that we don't replenish ourselves, and have been in our own safe yield since 2006. So let's talk a little bit about Scottsdale. So the city of Scottsdale, and these numbers are, the population numbers are projected from the Maricopa Association of Government. This hasn't been updated with the recent census. I actually believe the population is a little low since the recent census. But as projected by Maricopa Association of Government, MAG, we were at 255,000 people in Scottsdale. I actually think the census we're about 249. And MAG projects us to be about 311,000 people at our full capacity of people. So we got about 50,000 more people to go. For water deliveries, our active accounts, we have around 93,000 active accounts. and the overwhelming majority of those are single-family resident, followed up by multifamily and commercial. So when you're looking at Scottsdale and you're looking at the spread of how to build infrastructure and how to communicate with residents, we're overwhelmingly single-family residents. And so when you look at other cities, everyone has their own makeup of their customer base, and we have to look at what ours looks like and how we message to those. Our 2010 assured water designation components of water is broken down into the different allocations of water rights that we have. Now, our assured water supply is a part of that 1980 Groundwater Management Act legislation. So we, and like other valley cities, have an assured water supply, 100 years of assured water supply, and it's our legal access to all these components of water. That first bullet you see there is the groundwater, and as I mentioned should have mentioned in the last slide, water resource folks talk in acre feet. So an acre foot is exactly what it sounds like. It's 1 acre of land, a foot deep of water. And so it is enough to supply one Scottsdale family of 4 for 1 year. And in 2020, we delivered 98,000 acre feet of water. So the groundwater component in our assured water supply, we have almost 13,000 acre feet of groundwater. Now that component is broken up into 3 different sections. One is what's called a Groundwater Allowance, and this is given to us by the Arizona Department of Water Resources. One is a component called incidental recharge, and I'll cover that in a later slide. And the next component is we have a remediation exemption. In South Scottsdale, we have a groundwater remediation site that we treat some contaminated water to drinking water standards and are able to put that to beneficial use. We have long-term storage credits, which is basically your savings account. We have our Colorado River water supply through our CEP, our SRP supply, our Verde and salt water, our NCS supply, which is extra Verde and salt water, our Harquahela water, and we have reclaimed water. So as you can see, the total legal supply of water is 140,000 acre feet. Compare that to the 93,000 acre feet that we were able to deliver in 2020. So we have legal access to above and beyond what we are delivering today. So what does that customer profile look like when we say we're delivering water? That past slide when I said that our number of account holders are overwhelmingly single family is probably about 80 to 85%. But when you look at the actual volumetric deliveries of water, the commercial and the multifamily and the turf irrigation, those are large quantities of water. So the percent water delivery for single family residents are about 50% of our delivery, where the multifamily is around 16%, and it breaks down from there. So we take in this consideration when we look at our conservation programs and figure out what the best programs are for the different sectors we have, as well as where our growth areas of the town are. So as I talked about the water supply components we have, but we deliver certain percentages depending on the actual portions of supply that we have. So we have, in 2020, we delivered 4 different types of water to our customers, and this is both non-potable and potable water. So we have some portions of our delivery that's non-potable that we deliver for irrigation purposes. And then there's a larger portion that we deliver through our distribution system as potable water to our customers. So as you can see, we have a sliver that's our Sultan River project, which is about 13%. That ebbs and flows depending on what year you're in. So 13 to 15%. Some years we get more SRP water and some years we get less. And that's governed on the SRP system. And I will talk about how that system is governed differently than the CEP system. We try to use a very small percentage of groundwater. As I mentioned before, we have a goal of safe yield inside the city of Scottsdale. And then we have that reclaimed water that we deliver to those irrigation purposes. So that you can see that overwhelming portion is Central Arizona project, which is what we've been seeing in the news. So the latter part of this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more in depth about that CEP water and kind of what the shortage means to us, what's going on in the Colorado River water. Before I jump into the details of that, let's talk a little bit about the other 3 supplies. So we're going to talk about the Sultan Verde River water supply, and this system is governed completely different. The surface water system is governed completely different than the Colorado River supply. So the Sultan Verde, a water users association, the Roosevelt Dam was constructed back in 1904 to 1911. And it was basically the National Reclamation Act was passed, and the Salt River Valley Water Users Association was formed in 1903. Now, what that meant was a bunch of farmers and ranchers that had put that water to use before the dam, put their land up for collateral and able to get the loan from the federal government to build the dam. And they built the dam to have a more sustainable system. Without the dam, you get those really wet winters and it would flood out their crops, or you get those really dry years when they didn't get water. So the dam was able to stabilize and balance the system and build a long-term supply for them. But those folks put up their land for collateral and able to build that dam. So what does that mean? Scottsdale gets about 12 to 15% of its total supply from the SRP area. You can see that down in South Scottsdale, that red circle are SOP lands. And so when I mentioned a slide ago is those farmers put up their land for collateral, that means that the land that they had has rights to that water. So SRP water is tied to land. It's what's called appurtenant to the land. It cannot be moved around off project. You can see the yellow area is what's called on project. SRP affectionately calls it Marmaduke. So if you kind of look at it, the yellow areas actually kind of look like the cartoon, the dog Marmaduke. But aside from that, so those areas can only get SRP water. You can see why Scottsdale is only 15 to 12% of SRP water. Scottsdale is, as we know, long and skinny. So that's just a small sliver of what Scottsdale is, and that water can only be used on those lands. Now, that water is based on a multiplier allocation as determined by the board. So once the dam was built and the water was put in there, the landowners, Judge Kent made the Kent decree to figure out, well, who got what water. So there's a couple different types of SRP water. There's what's called normal flow. And so this is basically the rights of the water that are tied to those lands in purple. Those lands would have gotten water pre-dam. So they're now given water based on the flow upstream of the dam. And so there's a calculation based on the inflow that's happened at the dam system, and then also based on the priority of that land and when it was put into agricultural use. So let's say you got a piece of land that's in that dark purple area that was put into agricultural use in 1860. And then you got another piece of land that was put into use in 1895. They have different priorities. And so the one that was put into agricultural use later gets a higher priority, and there's a whole mathematical system of how much normal right flow they get. The other classification is going to be stored water. And so there's a multiplier. There's a 3 acre-foot per acre multiplier outside of normal flow. And that is made up of surface water and also a groundwater. And SRP does this and able to keep the reservoir system healthy. So in years when you don't get a lot of hydrology coming down off the river and the reservoir isn't full, that portion of the 3 acre-foot per acre multiplier for the surface water for the stored water is much lower. Last year when we had this really great winter and we had a lot of water flowing, the 3.0 acre feet per acre was all surface water. In a year where it's not, it could be 1.5 acre feet per acre of surface water. So that system really ebbs and flows from year to year, which means it's a little more challenging to plan for what's going to happen with that water right on project. All right, so now we're going to talk about groundwater. So what makes up groundwater? You got your natural recharge that comes off the mountaintop. This is snow runoff. This is rain runoff. You have what's called incidental recharge. And this is a term that is calculated and governed by the Arizona Department of Water Resources. And every city has their own multiplier based on a study that Arizona Department of Water Resources did a decade or so ago. And basically those are how much turf is inside of a city. So see all those divots inside, and they're called detention or retention ponds, and able to capture stormwater. So how much incidental recharge is based off of stormwater runoff, or someone, how much turf is in the service area and people watering it using their irrigation system. I believe Scottsdale's around 5.5% of their demand is our incidental recharge amount as per statute given to us by the Arizona Department of Water Resources. And the next bucket of groundwater is artificial recharge. So putting surface water, as you can see there, that recharge basin that it's pointing to, and letting percolate down into the groundwater, and that's our savings account. So we get credit for that as governed through the Arizona Department of Water Resources. So this is Scottsdale, long and skinny. We currently have around 23 potable wells, and we use these wells currently for times in the summer when we have a really high, it's called our peak month or a peak hour. We use it as a peaking operational flexibility for right now. When we are in serious drought and serious shortage at some point, they're there so we can call on our long-term storage credit. But currently we have a total capacity for our groundwater well infrastructure of almost 77,000 acre feet. So let's talk that artificial or long-term storage credits recharge. So in 2020, we recharged a total of 11,000 acre feet of either Central Arizona project water, our extra Central Arizona project, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a later slide, or our treated wastewater or reclaimed water. Over the last several decades, we've built that system up, and we have 225,000 acre feet in our savings account. So over the last couple decades, we've recharged the surface water underneath our feet or somewhere within the Phoenix active management area to be able to call upon in our savings account when we need it in a severe shortage or drought. So this is a figure actually of our water campus that is up just a little bit north of the 101. I don't know, hopefully you can be able to see those green dots that are around. Those are our Verde stone wells, and those are our injection wells where we take advanced water treated reclaimed water, and here we will inject the advanced water treated water into the ground underneath our own feet, which is really important so we can be able to call on it and keep our aquifer healthy. So now let's talk the biggest portion of our portfolio. Do we have any questions so far? Okay. All right, remember, if you do have any specific questions, you can type them into the chat. All right, how is Colorado River supply governed? Similar to, like I mentioned before, and surface water rights in the West are governed by prior appropriations. And so the Colorado River is governed by what's called the Law of the River. The 1922 compact, the Basin States got together and figured it out. It's one of the most litigated rivers in the world. And so there are 7 basin states. There are the upper and the lower. The upper consists of Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and a really small sliver of Arizona. And it's separated up at Lee's Ferry up in northern Arizona. And so the upper basin has access to 7.5 million acre feet, and the lower basin, which is Nevada, California, and Arizona, has access to 7.5 million acre feet. The subtotal being 50 million acre feet. And later on, our international compact with Mexico entered into this, and they have access to 1.5 million acre feet for a total of 16.5 million acre feet. Now, because of some of the disputes that happened in the first to middle half of the last century, and Arizona and California fought over who has senior and junior rights and who has what amount of water, which ended up in a lawsuit that went all the way to Supreme Court, Arizona v. California. And we won access to the Verde and the Salt that is not included in this system. And so that's our own, even though it's a part of the watershed, we want access to that. That's not a part of this governance system. However, we also were given junior rights to California, which means as the law of river structure is stated, California has senior rights, and therefore in a shortage, Arizona gives up almost all of its water before California will lose a drop of it. So that's obviously wasn't necessarily as concerning back in 1968 as it is today. And I'll go through what some of that means today and what some of our shortages are. But there's a really interesting and rich history between us and California over the last 100 years. Another interesting thing is the upper basin has to pass that 7.5 million acre feet on a 10-year average. And so if the river the runoff doesn't flow enough for 7.5 million acre feet to flow into Lake Powell, they still have to pass 7.5 million acre feet on average between Powell and Lake Mead. I say that on average because there are some components within the system that require them to pass more. So let's talk about Arizona's allocation and how we get our our Colorado River allocation. And here it shows we have 2.8 million acre feet. Well, that doesn't all go to the Central Arizona project. I just wanted to kind of notate that there are some. Can they see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So they're still on river rights. Oh. Okay. So there's on river rights, and they have priority rights because they put a lot of this land to agriculture use before Central Arizona. So this on river rights has priority rights over some of the Central Arizona projects. So Central Arizona project approximately has 1.6 million acre feet of allocated to it. Well, that's not working. Oh, there we go. Okay, so enabled to put our full Colorado River water allocation to use, and able to put it in areas that are the most populated areas of the state. In 1968, Congress approved the construction of the Central Arizona project with a debt of up to $4 billion, which we will be paying back through 2040. So the Central Arizona Water Conservation District consists of Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima County, as you can see from here. It was constructed in 1973 to 1993 for those folks who have been here for the last almost 50 years. Some of us remember, I'm not quite that old, but actually almost. So I remember as a kid living in Tucson when that water came to us. And if you remember any of that out there, you remember there was a whole thing in Tucson about that, but that's a story for another day. So what's really interesting about the Central Arizona project and the Groundwater Management Act that I mentioned a couple of slides ago was the federal authorization of the Central Arizona project canal is linked to the Groundwater Management Act. The federal government saw our groundwater issues and saw that we weren't managing that well, and said, we're not going to spend $4 billion on this until you get your house in order. And so we were basically mandated to come up with a groundwater code, which is where the 1980 Groundwater Management Act came up from. Nevertheless, it's still a groundbreaking piece of legislation, and we govern our groundwater really well with it. And it's something that us as Arizonans should be really proud of. Inside the Central Arizona project, just like between us and California and us and the upper Basin States, inside the Central Arizona project, there is a priority system. And I'm gonna, as I go into the shortage, I'll talk about where Scottsdale's water rights sit inside that priority system. But first, I just wanted to talk really briefly about what rights Scottsdale has and what percentage of its supply is. So we have almost a little over 81,000 acre feet of water rights to the Central Arizona project. It is governed by the party system, as I said, and the state of Arizona will have a shortage reduction based on the shortage declaration that just happened. And there's Scottsdale turnout. The water gets delivered up to our water campus. So let's talk about the shortage. I'm sure many of you have, if you quote unquote open a newspaper, although most of us just click on links, you can notice I almost stopped reading some of my emails sometimes because there's so many news articles about the shortage and the drought. But it is in the news and it is front and center, and it is not something you can really avoid if you read the news. So what has led us to this point in the Colorado River system? This graphic here is a 20+ year representation of the levels of Lake Mead, which govern the Colorado River system. And so the watershed is seeing a 20+ year portion of a drought. Basically, it's the 22 driest years on recorded history. So we're in a record drought. Beyond that, there is a lot of evidence showcasing that outside of just this drought cycle, there is aridification happening, which is a warming of the climate. You're seeing wetter summers, earlier runoff seasons. And so there's a little uncertainty as to what the new normal is, but there's some good acceptance that we're getting into the new normal. The third thing that's lending to the reduction in the water supply in the system is what's called the structural deficit. As I mentioned earlier, the Basin States got together in 1922 and signed well, they didn't all sign it, but signed the compact and it eventually became ratified. But they based that compact on one of the wettest periods on record. They didn't obviously know it at the time, but the allocation for all the Basin States is based on a really wet cycle, which we have not seen since, and none of the climate projections are showcasing it. So there's more allocation than the actual water is coming through the system. So what has the Basin States been doing because of that? This is not necessarily the biggest surprise. We've known this was happening. We have the 2007 interim guidelines that allocate who gets shortage when the system gets down to certain levels. Back in 2019, to overlay the interim guidelines, what's called the Drought Contingency Plan happened, and all the states signed that agreement. And these are additional cuts that overlay that and able to prevent drastic reductions and save the lake. And remember when I said how California has prior rights to Arizona because of the Arizona v. California lawsuit, and will get reduced first before California. The DCP was also groundbreaking in that California recognized their need to be a partner in this, and that they could let the lake go to Deadpool. And so they agreed as a part of the DCP to take cuts, even though they have higher priority. So what do those cuts look like? So as I mentioned, Lake Mead governs the system. Hopefully you all know where Lake Mead is, but if you don't, it's sandwiched between Nevada and Arizona, right next to Vegas. It's a beautiful reservoir, but from that last picture, you can see those rings and how low the lake has gotten. So as the lake decreases in elevation, because of the 2007 interim guidelines and the overlaying DCP, with each different lake level that is hit, institutes a shortage to each right holder. So we do have junior rights. So we are shorted first. Tier 0, you can see from those bubbles on the figure on the right, with each increasing bubble and lowering of the elevation, our shortage gets cut increasingly more. So you can see the little, they're not bubbles, but they're, you can see that California at a lower tier will take some reductions, and then Nevada will take reductions too. So what are the projections for Lake Mead and also the tier levels? So the Bureau of Reclamation is the governing body that manages the Colorado system and governs the system. And they come out with what's called a 24-month study. So it's based on different levels of hydrology and then how the system is operated. And they come out with this in August. And this is for the projections the next 2 years. And the August 24-month study will project whether there's a shortage on the system or not. So that dotted blue line is basically the projections for the system. If you 90th percentile hydrology. So the 90th percentile means they're seeing a really wet winter. We're getting great runoff. The middle green line is the 50th percentile, which is the most probable hydrology on the system. And the red dotted line is the 10th percentile, which means that there's going to be some dry conditions, and this is what they're seeing, the inflow with the dry conditions. What's really telling on this graphic is that every single one of those projections are showing that we will continue to be below that 1075 lake level, which means we are projected to be in a tier 1 shortage for the next 2 years or so. What's also really interesting and telling in this modeling effort is that dotted green line, December, let's see, I'm gonna turn this back on. All right, right here. So as you can see from this, a tier 1 is 1075, a tier 2 is 1050. We have two tiers too. So there's a 2A and a 2B. And the reason we have this is because California agreed to take cuts at 2B. So the 2A is 1050, 2B is 1045, and tier 3 is 1025. So here in the most probable 50th percentile for next year, basically December 31st, 2022, there's a potential for the lake to go to 1050, which would mean we'd be in a tier 2 shortage, 2A shortage, excuse me. So I'm going to go back here. That means we jump from 512,000 acre feet of reduction in a tier 1 over to this green bubble, which is 592,000 acre feet in a 2A. So as I mentioned, the CEP supply is a little less than 1.6 million acre feet. So this is about a third of the CEP supply. And because the water right holders on the river here have senior rights, the majority of these cuts, these tier 1 cuts, are going to be borne by CEP right holders. That also is true for tier 2A. So what does that mean for Scottsdale? This is a very colorful slide, and I did it on purpose. So here on the left is going to be the water rights that Scottsdale has legal right to, or we have a lease. We have several Indian leases that go out to 100 years, or we have an M&I subcontract. Here is what's referred to as the CEP priority stack. And how I mentioned before, water rights are junior to senior. Those with junior rights get cut first, and those with senior rights get cut last. So up here, there are different levels of water rights, and up here are the junior right holders, and up here are the senior right holders. So those get cut first are on top. And you can see that this 512,000 acre feet that's representing a tier 1 shortage will cut what's called other excess water, the agricultural pool water, and then what's called an NIA priority pool water. Do you have any questions?
What years span the 100 years? So like for the Indian water.
Oh, the Indian water. I believe we have 2 Indian leases, and one is with the San Carlos Apache tribe, and the other one with the Gila Indian River tribe. I believe they are probably about and I have to go back and check it, but I believe they're about a decade old. So we still have about 90 years on the terms of those leases. So the next priority pool that gets cut here is what's called the NIA priority pool. And it's just an old nomenclature. It's called non-Indian agriculture, but it's old nomenclature. It doesn't actually stand. There's a lot of cities and towns that have access to the NIA priority pool. So as you can see, when there's a cut, and this is an approximate, we're expecting the NIA priority pool in a tier 1 to be cut about 65%. That won't be known for about a month or two until CAP does a lot of their math. We have around 4% of our CAP supply is NIA priority. So we expect to be cut 3% of our 4%, well, 3% of our 100%. So a portion of this. But you can see the vast majority of our water is that Indian priority and the M&I priority, which won't get cut until a 2B, and it'll only be a sliver. And I'll go into that in a little further detail with some of the assumptions we made. And at this point, some of the exact cuts are assumptions. So what are those assumptions? So here is a table that was in the newly adopted from council in November of 2020. This is from the Drought Management Plan. And these are some of our assumed cuts in each one of the tiers. So here's tier 1, 2A, 2B, 2-3. And I say these are assumed because as people order their water, these demarcation lines can ebb and flow. So it depends on the percentage that gets cut in every single pool. So, but they're based on common knowledge of the water resource world. These are pretty good assumptions. So this is also, because this was a planning document, this is outside any mitigation strategies that the state has in place for the drought contingency plan. There are a couple of mitigation strategies in place for NIA right holders for the next year. So outside of that, tier 1, we expect to see around 2,300 acre feet reduced from our supply. 2A, 3,400 acre feet. 2B, 75. It's really the tier 3. This 15-ish thousand acre feet of supply that we could be cutting at tier 3 is where we really get concerned with our supply. So what have we done to plan for that? As I mentioned, we've known this is a potential for a while, is the hydrology in the system. We've been in the 22+ year droughts. We've also known about the structural deficit. We also have the framework of the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, so we can build a savings account. So what does our savings account look like? When I talk about a savings account, I like to have a financial analogy because it's just a really great equivalence. The city, we all have personal accounts and finances, and we all have a savings account. We do it for those times where we had unexpected or uncertain things that happen in our life. We have those things that are expected and we need to save for. So we have a savings account. We recharge our water, as I mentioned earlier. We have extra CAP water that we don't necessarily need currently to satisfy our demands. And so that extra CAP water we have been putting in the ground and recharging it and building what's called a long-term storage credit. We have also been doing that up at our water campus, as I showed us in a couple slides ago about all those Vadostone wells around the water campus. We take that reclaimed water, that advanced treated reclaimed water, and we put it in the ground and we build that savings account. So this is just a snapshot of the last 5 years. Now it's a snapshot because we've been recharging for the last couple of decades. But as you can see, on average, over the 5 years, we've recharged around 15,000 acre feet of extra water as long-term storage credits to be recovered at a time when we need it. So you can see in a tier 3, we are estimating 15,000 potentially being cut. So those two numbers are really nicely paired. The one caveat here is that you or I would never want to lean back on our savings account forever. It's there for those uncertain times. So we need to be mindful of all of our supplies and also mindful of the water that we individually use. And conservation is a big thing that the city is looking at. We have looked at forever. And we are asking all of our customers to do better and be more efficient because we don't want to lean on our savings account unless we absolutely need to. So what has the city been doing outside of recharge? The the Arizona statute requires all providers to have what's called a drought management plan to put in place in times of shortage. Now, it's up to the provider whether or not to trigger it or not. And the city of Scottsdale recognizes that although we've planned for this, the shortage on the Colorado River is a big deal. And we need to incite internally us to do better. And we also need to incite our customers to do better. So the city manager, based on the recommendations made by Scottsdale Water, instituted our drought management plan stage 1. This does not mean we have water restrictions to customers. This means we are having enhancement conservation messaging. And we've formulated what's called our drought management team internally to evaluate what needs to be addressed. So who makes up that drought management team? Now, we have everyone from the folks in the Scottsdale Water Department that manage our water to those folks in other departments that are key players in the city. We have our facilities folks who are working to be as efficient as they can with all of our facilities. Our parks director, we have finance, economic development, the city attorney's office, and planning and development, all talking about how we can plan, enhance our planning efforts and enhance our communication efforts with our droughts. What's the team's responsibility? So the team is responsible for coordinating, communicating both internally and externally to find ways to reduce and conserve our water usage and evaluate the severity of the drought and the impacts on the Scottsdale. We've internally met about 3 times now. We have monthly meetings to talk about the shortage and what it means to the city and its citizens. We've come up with a 5% reduction to city water usage. We feel that if we're going to ask our customers to volunteer, cut back on their water and conserve and be efficient, we should also do the same thing. So even though I'm going to highlight some of the efforts the city's already been doing long before the shortage. So even though let's say the Parks Department, about 2 decades ago, the Arizona Department of Water Resources looks at those turf facilities that are over 10 acres and it gives them what's called a conservation allotment. So what our parks did is they said, well, we can do one better. What we're going to do is we're going to do all of our parks, regardless of whether they're 10 acres or larger, and we're going to make sure that it's 15% underneath that conservation allotment. We're going to be as efficient as we can before anyone tells us we have to. With it, that equates to us 3 billion gallons saved over the last 20 years. Our facilities also have been undergoing over the last many years facility water audits. We are going from facility to facility to find ways that we could save water and use water efficiently and able to reduce it. So we've been doing those, but we're also asking our city to reduce its water usage by 5% across the city. Other efforts that the city of Scottsdale has been doing is, so like I mentioned, we activated our drought management plan to expand the conservation messaging. We are currently in the process of drilling 4 new what's called aquifer storage and recovery wells up near our water campus, and able to recharge more of that water, that savings account water inside our service area. So currently what it looks like for many providers is per statute, we can recharge that water anywhere within the active management area. And we have to do so because those facilities that are available to us, either owned by Central Arizona Project or in combination with Central Arizona Project and SRP, are their facilities. And so they are located where they're located. And they're not necessarily always near our service areas. They also take a decent amount of land mass, which we all don't necessarily have. So the city of Scottsdale many years ago decided that we needed to recharge that water closer to us inside our service area. So when we call upon all of those production wells, as I showed on those slides, when we call upon those production wells to recover that water, we're actually recovering that water that's underneath our feet. And it keeps our aquifer healthy when more and more folks in the valley start to run their groundwater wells because of the shortage. We want to keep our aquifer as healthy as possible. So that project is underway, and we have already drilled one of those wells and are on the way to drill the second one, and then the other 2 next fiscal year. We are expanding our recycled or reclaimed water recharge, and the irrigation system is well feasible. We're looking at areas where there's potential usage for some of that advanced treated water for irrigation needs. We're also expanding what's called our AMI meter network. And so AMI means automatic meter infrastructure. And this is something we really want to get our customers to use. The AMI, which is basically you get your bill in the mail every single month, and it is your monthly usage. And I bet the majority of you don't even look at it. And that's not pointing fingers, because the majority of most people don't look at it. And it's also, it's a snapshot of your monthly water usage. It's not really helpful to you if you get your water bill and in May it says you use 30,000 gallons. You don't know where or how you used it. What would be more helpful to you is to understand how you use it on an hourly resolution. And so that's what the AMI, or automatic meter infrastructure, will tell us and you as a couple through this customer interface portal. Is it tells customers and us how that water usage is happening on an hourly basis. So if you use your irrigation a couple times from 6 to 7 p.m. or a.m., you can go log in and see what that equates to. And if you would like some help figuring out, well, how much should I be irrigating? That seems like a lot of water. We have conservation staff that will come out and talk to you about what the appropriate amount of water is for the kind of landscape you have. We are also going to institute what's called leak alerts this year. We're hoping in a couple of months. Because this is an hourly resolution data, there's an algorithm inside this customer interface that looks at your hourly data. And if it sees that you use a specific threshold over a 72-hour time frame, it's assuming that there's a potential leak. And when we turn leak alerts on, it'll let customers know as, hey, we think you have a leak. We think you need to go investigate it. Here's some tools on how to walk through and investigate it. So it'll be a really great tool for customers to understand their own irrigation needs and usage, but also if they have a leak. So we're really excited and hopefully be able to turn that on in the next couple of months to find ways to help our customers. And if you're out there right now and you're like, that's really interesting, I want to see if I have one. Because we're in the middle of implementing that infrastructure, the AMI infrastructure, about 40% of our customers have it. So it's not 100% just yet. We wanted to make it available when we could and not wait to the end. So if you go to our website and you type in Watersmart, it'll bring you to an FAQ page, which will tell you all about how to sign up for Watersmart. It'll also have an interactive map. So you can go type in your address and find out if you have an AMI meter, which means you have hourly data. So that's a really exciting thing. So I want to ask everybody to go look that up on our website and find out more about Watersmart, see if they have it and sign up for it. And if you do have any questions about Watersmart, email our water conservation office and ask more questions about it. So speaking of our water conservation office and all the conservation things that we do, we've had a water conservation office for decades. And we have a very robust conservation program to serve our customers so they can use water efficiently. Now we've grown these programs to be what they are today. So we have several incentive rebates. We have community workshops. That's what we're doing tonight. We're trying to teach you guys things about water resources, and we have a bunch of other workshops that'll happen weekly for the next 5 weeks to learn more about how to be more efficient with conservation. We do commercial water audits. Not only do we do our facilities, but we offer this to commercial entities. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to mention it, but last year we did both Targets in Scottsdale. So we have a lot of commercial entities that are really excited and interested in using water more efficiently, and we have programs available to help them do so. Like I mentioned, we have the Watersmart portal. Everyone should go sign up for that. We have a newly instituted HOA water budget program, and I'll mention a little bit more in detail in a couple more slides. And we have a residential outdoor water efficiency check. So these are some of the rebates we have available to you and any of the other residents and customers here in Scottsdale to use water more efficiently. Toilet rebates, smart irrigation controller rebates, and then a newly water management and efficiency rebate. And we do some removals too as well. We do turf removal conversions, and pool removals and water softener removals. So I mentioned a couple of slides ago about someone coming out and helping you with your irrigation. This is called a residential outdoor water efficiency check. So we have experts here in the water conservation office that will come and walk you through what your landscape watering needs and how your irrigation controller is set up and what would be a more efficient way to manage your landscape. And so they'll come out to your house and give you conservation tips and help you be more efficient and set you up with Watersmart. We also have our commercial water audit program, as I mentioned a couple of slides ago. We're really proud of this and hope to grow this even more. We've found some really great water savings internally to our city facilities, and we're working with facilities to institute those, but we're also hoping to help commercial entities in Scottsdale be as efficient as they can with water. They have an important business to run, and they're a part of our growing and robust economy, but it's really important that they also use water as efficiently as possible. And one of our newer programs is our HOA or multifamily budgeting program. So outdoor irrigation or turf usage can be one of the higher water usages in any provider's service area. And so what we want to do is we want to help people. You can save water just by appropriately watering. And the majority of folks don't know exactly how much they're watering or when they need to water. You can see from the graphic right here, this is just taken from one of our customers. This dotted line is where, based on a budgeting program that we have, this would be the most effective way and efficient way to use water on the turf that they had and able to keep it healthy, but also you can notice that they have been overwatering and also somewhat sporadically watering. So enabled to get them in line, they can keep the turf that they have and save water. And at the same time, we'll talk to them about, are there areas of their organization that maybe we can identify for maybe some turf removal. And like I said, we have a rebate for that. So the idea here is to be as efficient as we can with the water that we have access to. Do we have any questions? Okay, so I'll take the questions, but I just want to, I want to end with, we are working really hard to prioritize and promote and highlight the conservation efforts, and both what the city can do, but with what our residents can do. And we've done really well, the city of Scottsdale, in planning for the shortage and drought, but there's some really serious things happening on the Colorado River, and it's everybody's responsibility to use water as efficiently as we can. We have enough water, but we don't have enough to waste. And with that, does anybody have any questions?
So
Don't really have any, just this one.
Okay.
we have somebody concerned. Their question is, if the drought continues, at what point will Scottsdale residents see restrictions, and what might those restrictions entail?
So it's hard to understand exactly when. I'm going to go back to one of the drought pages. It's hard to understand exactly what's going to happen with the hydrology. Now, this is the 90th percentile and the 10th percentile, but there's other modeling experiences outside of this. And the Basin States are all talking, and the Secretary of the Interior has now been brought in to talk about the basin on a broader scale. So there's other components within the system. And I hope what you've got from tonight is the governance around the system is really complex. So there might be some other tools that the state and also the federal government is talking about. So it's hard to understand what that will look like and then overlay what's happening with Scottsdale. Currently, right now, we don't have any plans to restrict our residents or commercial customers from using water. Should we have a conversation about what that looks like? That is a higher policy question that we'll have to have a conversation with leadership and whether or not that's something that we think is necessary in Scottsdale, but there are no plans currently right now to anytime in the near future to mandate restrictions on customers. This is a voluntary and educational process with our customers.
Another question, what's the plan and timing to transition to these new smart meters? I know I don't have one.
So the smart meters, it's really complicated to, so because, and I don't have the graphic here, because Scottsdale has such a decent relief and elevation, you have to, the signal has to go to what's called a repeater and then a collector. And then, so it's not necessarily, I want to bring up the website. We're still figuring out where all the collectors and repeaters need to go in the system. If you were a flat system that was homogeneous, you could say, hey, we need a collector and repeater every quarter of a mile. But because we are neither one of those things, our consultant has to kind of figure out where a collector and repeater needs to go. Maybe it has a signal of a quarter mile, maybe it has a signal of a half a mile. Once they figure that out, they can put another one up. Also, as we all are experiencing, there are supply chain issues with infrastructure. So we are seeing some recording in progress. We are seeing some issues with getting some of that infrastructure. So it is a process to figure out how to put those levels of infrastructure up. And we are trying to get them up as quickly as possible. Now, those folks that live way north in North Scottsdale, because that relief is so high, we are under evaluation to find alternatives to some of the technology that won't necessarily be applicable up in the northern portions because of the geographical relief. So the northern portions of town are probably going to be the last to get this, just because that infrastructure process is a little more complicated. We do hope to get the majority of Scottsdale within the next year to 2 years. And so that's kind of the best we can say right now, is we're in the middle of that process, and it is just a process.
We have another question, and I think actually one of us you may be able to answer this, but we can too.
Okay.
Are you looking at directing incentives for contractors like plumbers for water conservation, for instance, offering payments to plumbers for installing a low flow toilet rather than the homeowner?
Because the homeowner is our customer, and because with incentives and the way that our system is set up, the incentive is actually pushed through the water bill. And that's just the way our finance department says that is necessary for us to set it up. We can't give money to someone who is not a customer, and the plumber's not a customer.
You have a question about the West Valley?
Oh, I can try.
There's a lot of development in the West Valley, and I've read they are using groundwater. Is there some regulatory state agency to monitor this?
So the West Valley, I'm going to bring up the AMA. The Arizona Department of Water Resources regulates the entire AMA, and it's a very there we go. All right, so if you're over here, well, this is the edge of Glendale, so Avondale, all that stuff out here. They're inside the Arizona, the Phoenix Active Management Area. So any groundwater that's pumped over here is regulated through the Arizona Department of Groundwater. So just like us, we have to account for it and we have to replenish it. Now, if someone doesn't necessarily have direct access to Central Arizona Project or SRP project, there's something called the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, which will satisfy the replenishment obligation for that groundwater user. So that is a tool that the state put into place a while ago for those folks that don't have direct access to those surface water allocations. So if the West Valley pumps groundwater, they have to make up for it, whether or not they have their own surface water supply or they are a member of the CAGRD.
And we have a question about rates.
Oh.
What water rate increases could we expect over the next 5 years? And would you consider incremental water rates?
So what water rates can be expected over the next 5 years? Scottsdale, that's kind of an unknown. So that's not something we're necessarily going to be able to answer. Scottsdale evaluates our rates on an annual basis, and we go to council with that every year. We are currently through that cycle of the budget process right now. So they are evaluating that, and they will have to go to council, and leadership will have to go to council and explain what rates are necessary and why. One thing that we all need to be aware of is, so let's see, I probably don't have it up. So there's a certain amount of water, like I said, that comes through the Central Arizona project, right? A little less than 1.6 million acre feet. But in a shortage, well, I like figures, but I have a lot of figures. So in a shortage, the Central Arizona project still has the operating and maintenance costs, just like not one of us do. They still need to maintain this canal. They still need to do all the projects they need to do that were on the books outside of a shortage. However, when there's a shortage and that cost is still the same, but the volume is reduced by a third, that per acre foot cost in your operating and maintenance charge of CP goes up. So because of the shortage, all providers will see a raw water cost increase. Which means that those costs will have to be seen by you and I, those people who use that water. So everyone in the valley, everyone who uses CAP is expecting that cost to increase. Now, there are other components of our rate structure that also lend to cost. There's aging infrastructure. There's infrastructure needs. There's operating needs. There's a bunch of other needs that all go towards the delivering water that can increase costs. But every year we go to council with our rate needs depending on that operating and maintenance cost and that raw water cost. But we will see the raw water costs go up because of shortage. And so you can expect water rates to reflect that.
And oh, sorry.
One other thing, if you are curious about Watersmart, the program that was mentioned earlier, there is now a link that you can kind of check that out, sign up, and get more additional information.
And then we have the $1 million question of when are we going out of the drought?
Oh, when is the drought? I don't think anybody actually knows the answer to that. So there's the difference, like I mentioned in this slide, there's the difference between what's the drought and what's the new normal. And that's still a big question mark. There's a lot of water managers in leadership amongst the states and also the federal government that believe that some of this is not a drought and is the new normal, but there's a lot of uncertainty into that system. So there's not an exact answer to what the system will happen with the hydrology that will happen in the future. And I think that's even more so why it's important for us to conserve and be as efficient as we can with water. We have planned for this. We knew, and we planned for the uncertainty and for droughts and for the structural deficit because we live in a desert and we've done a good job of planning. But it's really important that every single customer uses water as efficiently as possible.
All right, can you speak on the subject of Pacific Ocean desalination?
Well, I mean, so desalination can be very costly. It's an energy intensive technology. I know that the federal government, in partnership with the Central Arizona Project, is looking at partnerships with California to find ways to maybe implement technology that will help them save water and in turn help the system. But and I know that there are some conversations with Mexico to do the same, but those are high-level federal conversations, and those are still in the middle of them. So I don't think there has been any decisions on what that looks like or the money needed to do so. Okay, well, we got some time. We don't necessarily need to sit here all the way. If there's any more questions, we'd love to take them. We also want to, if you found this interesting, please, let your community and your neighbors know that you found this interesting. This should be up on our website as soon as our technical communications team can take this video and kind of clean it up a little bit and then put it on the website, and it's there. We have a water conservation page on our website. The Watersmart portals on our website. If you're interested in having a conservation staff come out and talk you through maybe some efficiencies you could do with your irrigation, we'd love to have the staff come out and just email the conservation email inbox and set that appointment up. I think hopefully one of the things too that you folks are, and I mentioned this at council on Tuesday, even though Scottsdale is positioned really well and we plan for this, and the other valley cities have planned for this well and are positioned well too. This is not just a valley issue or an Arizona issue. This is a basin issue, and so finding tools that can mitigate what's happening in the Colorado or newer water sources or technology that will expand the water sources we have is a larger Colorado River Basin issue that will take a lot of collaboration between internal parties in Arizona and external parties across state lines along with the federal government. So this will continue to be a conversation with those water managers as well as the federal government to find ways to continue to make our systems resilient and find solutions.